Okay, so in this episode, you're going to learn how to make a forgotten password system inside your website. And this is sort of continuing off a previous episode I made on how to create a login system. So I'm going to go ahead and leave a link for that in the description if you haven't learned how to make a login system. It kind of goes that you need to learn how to create a login system in order to make a forgotten password system because they sort of go together. But it doesn't matter if it's my login system or if it's some that you made by yourself. Any kind of login system will work for this episode here. So just so you're aware of that. Now, when it comes to creating a forgotten password system, there's a couple of different ways we can do it. There's essentially what I can think of 3 ways we can do it. The first way, which is a way you shouldn't be using because it's very unsecure, is that we simply send a password from the database to the user by email. If you ever go to a website, and the reason I'm mentioning this method is because if you ever go to a website anywhere online that simply sends you your password by email, then you shouldn't be using their website for anything secure or sensitive, because it is a very unsafe website to use because they don't protect your information inside the database. So this first method is not going to work, but I'm mentioning it because if you see it, then stay away from it. The second method is that we, as the owner of the website, can, when the user goes into the website and clicks on that link that says, I forgot my password, we can create a new password for the user that we update the database with, and then we send that new password to the user by email. Then they can take this password, log into the website, and then change the password themselves inside the website, which is sort of a solution we can do, but we sort of run into the issue of usability, because most users don't want to get a new password that is a bunch of gibberish characters and then log into the website and change the password again. So most users do want to just be able to have an email sent to them where they can click on a link that takes them to our website, and then they just simply can change, the password inside the website by creating a new one. And that's the third method, which is what we're actually going to do in this episode. We're just going to go ahead and send an email to the user that takes them back to our website where they can just simply write in their password that they want the password changed to. The reason that method is better is because we allow for better usability inside the website, but this method is also slightly more complicated than the second method I mentioned. So we're going to be talking about something called tokens, which is a new concept to probably a lot of you, but I will try to explain it as well as I can as we go through this episode here. It's not that complicated once you really get into it, but if you haven't seen it before, you might get a little bit overwhelmed. But just calm down. We'll do it together and everything's going to be fine. So what I want to mention here is the fact that, as you may have noticed, the 3 methods that I talked about involve sending an email to the user. The reason we want to do this is because sending an email to the user adds another layer to security by the hacker. If a hacker were to gain access to our website and they want to reset the passwords, then they also need to have hacked the user's email account in order to reset the password. So this is a good way to do it because they would also need to have access to the user's email. So now, there's a lot of security things you can do to these sort of systems. This is a basic guide on how to do this. There's always a lot of things you can do. For example, there's something called cross-site request forgery that you could do, which is something that we're not going to talk about in this episode, but I will probably have an episode later on in the future that talks about this. Just know that this is a basic guide on how to create a forgotten password system that is going to work in the end. Now, before we get into the episode, let's talk really briefly about what a token is, because that is going to be one of the major highlights of this episode, which is that we're going to create this token. Now, a token is essentially a one-time password that we create for a short period of time that we use in order to properly authenticate that this is the correct user who is trying to reset the password. That is basically what a token is. We're basically going to make a new table inside the database that has these tokens in it. And when a user clicks that I forgot my password button, we're going to make a row inside that table that simply has the information of who is trying to reset the password. And we're going to use that to authenticate the user when they actually resets the password. So that's basically what a token is in very brief and basic terms. So let's go ahead and dive into what we're going to do here, because I've been talking for a long time now, but I think it's important that you know exactly what you're getting into before we get into it. There's one more thing I need to mention. Because we're sending emails to the user, when they have to reset the password, we're going to be using the mail function inside PHP, the built-in mail function. Now, if you're not aware of this, when you set up a mail function using PHP, you might have done it before using just a basic contact form. You might have noticed that in a lot of cases, the emails don't actually get sent to the person you're trying to send it to. And that's because if we're working on a local version of the website like I have here, we don't have a mail server running on our computer. You need to have a mail server in order to use the mail function in PHP. When you upload a website to the internet onto your server that is online, a lot of times they will have a mail server on that platform. So you will be able to send emails to yourself inside the website. So if you have a contact form, they can send it to you. If you have a mail, a mail account set up inside your hosting company. But there's also going to be issues when they send mails out to other people, because you need to have a mail server that sort of takes care of this. So do keep in mind that a mail server is an important aspect in order to actually get the email sent. I will make sure I leave some links in the description, so you will have some places to go to learn more about how to set up a mail server. So check out the description if you don't know how to do this. I do believe you can also use Gmail to set up a mail server, which is kind of cool. So I will also, if that's possible, leave a link for that in the description. I know I've done it in the past, so Gmail is probably an option here. So you can just create a basic Gmail account and set it up as a mail server if that's something you want to do. But enough said, let's actually go and get into this episode here. What we're going to do is I'm going to show you exactly what we're going to be building. This is my online version of the finished website we're going to build today. And this is my email account inside my hosting company. And because there's a mail server running inside my hosting company, I can send emails to myself. So if I were to go inside the website here and sign up, because I honestly don't remember what my usernames were from the previous episode, I'm just going to go ahead and make something like test as a username. I'm just going to use my danny@mmtuts.net email. I'm going to use a password. It's going to be 123 123. Sign up. Now, if I were to say, yikes, I forgot my password, then what I can do is I can go into my sign up page. At the bottom here it says forgot your password. Again, you can put that link anywhere inside your website. I'll put it inside my sign up page. That's just my personal choice. So I'm going to click it. It's going to take me to a page that says reset your password, and then I can type in my email address. It was the one called danny@mmtuts.net, and then I can receive a new password by mail. So I click it, and it says check your mail. I'm going to go ahead and go to my webmail, just refresh it, and there I have a link. So if I were to click it, I am going to just copy the link that is in here. Again, the reason that this isn't very pretty to look at and it's not an actual link I can just click on, because you might want to have that, it's because this specific mail server or this mail inbox that I have here doesn't really allow for real links. So that's why I have to sort of, drag over and highlight it and then paste it inside the browser. So don't worry about that. You will be able to actually click a link in this episode here. So if we were to go to the link, right now we do actually have a token activated inside our database, just in case you didn't know. When we sent the email to us, that token was created, and it's still existing for a limited amount of time, because you don't want a token to exist for too long. And you also want to make sure you never have more than one token active at once you do have at least per user inside the website. So anytime you're done with a token and you have reset the password, you need to delete the token again. So that's important. So in here, I can go and just write in my new password. Last it was 123. This time I'm going to go and say test 123. Test 123. Reset the password. Your password has been reset. So if I go up to the top here, I can go ahead and say, well, my username was test and test 123. And if I were to log in, you can now see it says you are logged in. So I reset my password using my basic system here. That was the demonstration. I will go and leave timestamps in the description so you don't need to, so you can skip forward if you need to, just in case you need to know. So what we're going to do now is I'm just going to go into my local version of this website. I'm not going to work on it online, because then I need to upload the files each time I make changes to it. So I'm just going to create the website online locally, and then I'm going to upload it online afterwards. So that's probably the easiest way to do this. I know it's possible to set up a local mail server, but it's not something I want to get into in this episode here because it takes a little while. Let's go ahead and just dive into what we have here. Right now I'm inside my signup.php file. Again, if you made a different login system than my previous login system tutorial, yours might look different. What I have here is just my previous login system signup page. It is essentially this page here. So there's not a lot going on inside of this page here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and create a basic link, and I'm just going to go ahead and send it to my whatever page I want the user to be able to reset their password in. So we're just going to go ahead and link it to a new page that we haven't created yet inside the website. And this is going to be an actual page inside the website. So I'm going to create a page that I want to call reset password.php. And then I just need to include some text in here. So we can say something like forgot your password. And that's basically it. So we can go ahead and save what we have here, and then we're just going to create a new file, which is going to be the new page. And I'm going to go ahead and save that inside my root folder. So I'm just going to go ahead and save it as reset password. It was called reset password.php. Okay, so now we have this new file, and what we're going to do in here is we're going to create just that basic page that I showed you guys inside my website here. So we click forgot your password. This is what we're going to create. So it's not going to be that complicated. So going inside this page here, I'm just going to go and copy paste what we have from inside the sign up page because we need something that looks identical. And I'm just going to go and delete everything inside my main section here that I included to include content. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete what we have here. There we go. So we just have some basic containers. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change the title because it needs to be called something else. I'm going to call this one reset your password. And then below here, we're going to include a paragraph because we need to explain to the user what they need to do. In a lot of cases, we do need to do that. Otherwise, the user doesn't understand. So I will say, I'm just going to copy my text over here from my cheat sheet because I do have my cheat sheet over here from the online file I showed you. An email will be sent to you with instructions on how to reset your password, just something basic. Then below here, we're going to just create a form. I'm just going to go and delete the classes for now. I'm not going to do any styling because that is something that you guys should know how to do. Again, in my login system tutorial, even though I mentioned it, styling is not something we're going to be doing in this PHP series. It's something that you should know how to do by now. And it's something that just takes up time in these episodes, which are already going to be quite long. So styling is not going to be something we have in these episodes. You should know how to do it. So now that we have the form here, I am going to go ahead and set a new action because we're not going to send them to the index page. Instead, I'm going to send them to, or at least I'm going to send this information inside this form to a separate file that is just going to have PHP scripts inside of it. So in my personal websites, I like to have what is called include files inside a separate folder. When you have files inside your website, you have regular pages like the sign up page, the front page, and that sort of thing. And then you also have files that doesn't really get shown inside the website, but just has PHP scripts inside of them that just run, and you don't ever see them inside the website. I put these files inside a separate folder to have some system inside my root folder called the includes folder. And I have a special way I name these files. So don't get confused about me putting them inside folders and naming them a little bit weird. So I'm going to go ahead and call this one reset requests. And so far, there's nothing weird about the naming. But then I'm going to call it .inc.php. Don't get confused about the .inc part. I could also just have called it reset.php. It is just naming purposes. This entire thing here, again, people keep asking me in the previous episodes, this entire thing here is the name. The .inc is not the extension. It's just the name. .php, which is the extension. Okay? There's nothing hocus pocus going on here. The method is going to be set to post, and then we're going to have one input inside the form. So we're going to set an input. The type is going to be text because we want them to write their email, so we can actually send them the reset thing to the email. So we're going to set a name that is just going to be email. We're not going to have a value, but we're going to have a placeholder because we don't want to fill everything in for them. Then we can write something like enter your email address. So we can say enter your email address. I think this is correct 2 Ds. And then we're going to include a button. It might be 1D. I'm a little bit unsure about it now. We're going to set this one as a submit type. And I'm going to go ahead and set the name to, let's go ahead and set this one to reset request submit, just to have a name for it. Now this is what we're going to be, this name here we're going to use to actually check if the user entered the next script that we're going to open up in the correct way. If they try to enter, because you can go inside the URL and just go ahead and enter any sort of include files by going inside the includes folder and then accessing these script files, and we don't want the user to do that. So that's why we want to include this special little name here. So inside the button, we're just going to go ahead and say receive new password by mail, by email. There we go. So now that we have this, we just need to create this file called reset_request.inc.php. So we're going to go up inside our text editor, create a new file. I'm going to save it inside my includes folder as, like I said, it was called reset_request.inc.php. If I believe that was correct, I'm just going to double check. Yes, that is correct. And in here, we're going to go ahead and set up the code that is going to send the email to the user. And we're also going to go ahead and create the token inside of here. Now, this specific script is going to be the most complicated part about this episode. So you've been warned ahead of time. Once you're done with this and you understand it, then you can breathe lightly and think, okay, that was the hardest part. So in here, we're going to open up the PHP tags. I'm not going to close the PHP tags because there's no need for that if you have a pure PHP script file, because there's no HTML coming afterwards. We don't have to close it. A lot of people ask me about that. And I'm going to go ahead and do a if statement that checks if the user entered this page correctly by actually clicking this reset password button. That was what I was talking about before. So inside the if statement, I'm going to check if something is set, which in this case is going to be a name attribute from inside the form called reset requests submit, if I was not mistaken. And we don't need to just include it like that. We do actually need to just copy it and make sure we check for a post method called that specific thing. So there we go. Now that we did this, everything that is inside the if statement is going to be shown if the user did enter this page correctly. We could also, just as a safe precaution, if the user did enter this page incorrectly, send them back to the front page. So we're just going to go and say else header, and then say we want to send them to a location, which is going to be .. because we're going back a folder inside our root folder. Again, if you didn't include these files inside a includes folder, you don't need to include .. And then we're going to send them to index.php. Okay, so inside of here, the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to go ahead and start with the tokens before we do anything else. Now, a token has to be made cryptographically secure. And we have PHP functions that are built into PHP to help us do that. The newest one, as of this video here, are going to be using a couple of functions, one called random bytes and one called bin to hex. Now, random bytes is going to generate random bytes that we can use for creating this token, which is going to be cryptographically secure. And then the bin to hex is going to convert these bytes to a hexadecimal format that we can use inside a link. Because when we send a link to the user by email, the token is going to be part of that link. And it has to be something we can actually insert into the link, which, you know, bytes is not something we can really do. So that's how we're going to do that. So we're just going to start by creating a variable called a selector. Now, something I didn't talk about is the fact that we are going to have not one, but 2 tokens. We're going to have one token that we use in order to actually authenticate that this is the correct user. Then we're going to have a separate token that we're going to use to look inside the database to make sure that to actually pinpoint the token that we need to check the user with when they get back to our website. Because I separate these two tokens, we could use the same token for both of these functions, but because I use two different tokens, we avoid something called timing attacks. And timing attacks is a way for a hacker to brute force their way into our website. So this is going to help with that. I'm not going to get too much into timing attacks because that is a separate subject. So just know that this is for safety. We're doing this. So we're going to create a selector token, which is going to be, again, we're going to create random bytes. So we're going to use the random underscore bytes function we have inside PHP. And we're just going to go ahead and generate 8 bytes. Now with this, we're going to convert this to hexadecimal format so we can use it for later. So I'm going to say we have another function called bin to hex. And again, once we do actually get the token and we have to authenticate the user later on when they do try to reset the password, we need to convert this back to a binary. So hex to bin, which is another function we have, but we're going to use that later. So now that we have this, we can actually just go ahead and well, we shouldn't copy paste because we don't need the second function in here. We're just going to go and create another variable. We're going to call this one token, which is going to be the one that actually authenticates the user to make sure this is the correct user. We're going to set this one equal to random underscore bytes. And this one has to be slightly longer because this needs to be secure. So we're going to say 32 bytes. So now we have 2 tokens that we're going to use for later. And we're going to go ahead and go down below here. And the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to create the link that we're going to send to the user by email. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say we have a URL. Now, depending on your website, this is going to change because my website is called mmtuts.net. So I have to use that as part of my link. Go ahead and make your link into your website. So change it according here. I'm going to go ahead and set this one equal to www.mmtuts.net / forgotten password. Again, this is just because I have a folder inside my online version of my website called forgotten password where I inserted this episode. So you might not need to have forgotten password as part of your URL. Just write your URL. That's essentially what I'm saying. This entire first part here is just my URL for my website. You need to change that. Then after the / here at the end of your URL, we're going to go ahead and refer to a page called create-new-password, which is a page we haven't created yet inside our website, .php. Now, when we send a user here, we do also want to include the tokens. So inside the link here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and include first of all the selected token, and then afterwards the regular token that we're going to validate the user with. So we're going to say we have a selector get method inside the URL. We can grab it using a get method, and we're going to set this one equal to the selector we just created up here. Now I'm just going to go ahead and say I want to include some PHP. There we go. I know you can just include variables when you use double quotes, but it's the habit of me to do it this way, so that's how I'm going to do it. Make sure you close off the double quotes here because that's important. Otherwise, you can't add PHP as part of the string. And then afterwards here, I'm going to say and we have a validator, if I can spell that is going to be set equal to, again, another piece of PHP code. So we're going to say want to set equal to this token up here. But in this case here, we want to make sure as well, because you might have noticed we didn't convert this to hexadecimal format up here. And that's because I want to later on inside our script here, include the token inside the database without converting it to hexadecimals. So this token is not going to get converted to hexadecimals until we get down to create the link down here. So we're going to use the bin to hex and then put it inside the parentheses here. There we go. So now this URL is actually something we can use when we send it to the user. Now that we did this, the next thing we need to do is we need to create an expiry date for a token. Because like I said, a token should not be something that is allowed infinitely inside the website. When you create a, when you go to any kind of website and you ask to get a reset password set to your email, it's going to deactivate after maybe 10 minutes or 30 minutes or an hour. A lot of people would say an hour would be too much, but that's what we're going to go for in this episode here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create a expiry date. So I'm going to say expires as a variable. Then I'm going to go ahead and set this equal to the date method we have inside PHP. And I'm going to go ahead and set it to a U format, which is just going to give us just a generic format for the date that we have today. And then I'm going to add an hour to it, which is going to be in, I believe, seconds. So we're going to say we want to add 1800s to it. Because then when we insert this into the database as the expiration date, then it's going to be 1 hour ahead from now. If I were to do that right now, it's going to be 1 hour from now. And then when we get back to actually reset their password, when they get back to our website, we need to make sure that the date is not past what we insert into the database. So that's the basic idea here. So we're just going to go ahead and add this right here. Let me just go ahead and move everything down so you can actually see what's going on here. There we go. Okay. The next step is that we need to actually set up the token inside the database, because we need to not only create the URL we're going to send to the user, but we're also going to have the token inside our database. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go inside my local host, access my database. And inside my database, what you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and create a new table. So select your database, go inside the SQL tab, and we're going to go ahead and create the new table in here. So in here, I'm going to create a table called password reset. And this password reset table is going to have the tokens we're using for this episode here. So I'm going to say I want to create table. Let me actually go ahead and zoom in because you guys can't see anything what's going on in here. Create table, pwd reset, parentheses, semicolon. I'm just going to move this down on separate lines. There we go. And in between here, I'm going to go ahead and create an ID column, which is going to be called pwd reset ID. And I'm going to set this one to a integer and have maximum 11 characters. Then I'm going to set this one as the primary key. Auto increment it to make sure it increases by itself. Auto increments. And we're going to set it to not null. There we go. Then I'm going to set a password reset email, because we need to also store the email of the user that is trying to reset their password. So we're going to do that as well. I'm going to set this one to a text type. And I'm going to go ahead and set this one to not null. Make sure on the last line here you don't include a comma at the end, but on all the other lines, make sure you include a comment, because a lot of people get that error too when they write me in the comment section. We're going to create one called password reset selector, which is going to be the first token that we created inside the code. So this is going to be the selector one. We're going to set this one to text as well, not null. Next line, we're going to set the actual token that we're going to authenticate the user with. So we're going to say password reset token, and then we're going to set this one to long text, just to make sure it can get as long as possible. Again, there's a lot of different data types you could set it to. I'm just going to set it to long text here. And password reset expires, which is when the token should expire and the user should no longer be able to use it. So that's going to be the last one we have here. So password reset expires, and then we're going to set this one to text. Going to set it to not null. And there we go. So now what you want to do is you want to actually run it inside your database. So you actually have it inside your database. Now, once you're done here, I don't know if you know how to upload a website to the internet, but once you upload your website to the internet, make sure you export the actual database. You can actually, now I would typically run it, but I do think I have it inside my, database already. So where to go back here? Actually, no, I don't have it. So we could actually just do that. Just gonna go ahead and run it. There we go. And as you can see, we now have a password reset table as well that has no data inside of it. Now, when you upload your website to an online server, make sure you export the database and import it into your online version of the website server, of database, it's called. Make sure you do that. So now that we have this, you have everything you need to have inside the database, and we can actually continue inside the PHP code. So the next thing we need to do in here is that we're going to go ahead and insert this inside this table we just created. So the next thing we're going to do is going to go to a couple of new lines, and we're going to go ahead and connect to the actual database, because we haven't done that yet, and I don't want to do it until we actually created all this here. So what I want to do is I want to say we include, or we could say we require. These basically does the same thing. We can just choose we want to include an error message with one of these, and we can't with the other. So they do much the same. Require dbh.inc.php, which is the name of my database connection file, which I have inside my root folder, just to show it, because that's probably pretty important for you to see. Let me just go and find it here. It's somewhere. Okay, so this is my database file, and as you can see, it's very basic. We just have basic information about the database, so we can connect to it. And then we just simply connect to it down here. Now this variable, which is equal to the connection to the database, is what we need to grab in order to do what we need to do inside our file. So I'm just going to go back inside the file here and close off the require statements. And then what we can do is we can actually go ahead and fetch the information from the form that send us to this specific file here, because we haven't done that yet, and that's the very first thing you should probably do, but I choose to do it later. Again, you can do whatever order you wish to do. Just go and follow what I do here, and you'll be fine. I'm going to set up a variable called user email, and I'm going to go ahead and set it equal to a post method, because that's the method we use to send the data to this file. And I'm going to go ahead and include, let's actually go and make sure we don't use a colon, but a semicolon. And then in here, we just simply include the post name that we included inside the name attribute inside the form. So in this case, it's the email we're trying to grab. So I'm just going to write email, because that was the name that we used right here. Now, what we need to do now is we need to actually delete any existing entries of a token inside the database. That's the first thing we need to do to make sure that there's no existing token from the same user inside the database. If the user tried to reset their password, let's say 20 minutes ago, then there might still be a token inside the database if they didn't reset their password already. So if they try to send the email to themselves twice without resetting the password, then we're going to have multiple tokens, and we don't want to have that. So we're going to, first of all, access the database and delete any existing tokens from this specific user here. So I'm going to create a SQL variable that's going to be set equal to a SQL string. Let me actually go ahead and just scroll down here so we can actually see. And it's going to be a delete statement. So we're going to say we want to delete from password reset, which is the new table we just created, where password reset email is going to be equal to question mark, because we want to use prepared statements here. So we're not going to insert any data directly inside our SQL statement. We want to do that separately, because otherwise we don't make a secure system here. Next thing we need to do is we need to create a prepared statement. So we can actually do this. So we're going to create a variable called STMT, which stands for statement. And we're going to go ahead and initialize a new prepared statement using the connection from our database. So we're going to say MySQLi. And this is a MySQLi way to do it. If you want to do it using something else, then do that. This is going to be using PHP MySQLi functions, just so you know that. I'm going to say underscore STMT underscore init for initialize. And then we just need to initialize the connection from inside the database file, which we linked to up here, right there. And that is going to be the variable con variable we have in there. Now that we have this one, the next thing we need to do is we need to prepare the prepared statement to get it ready. And we're going to prepare it with this SQL statement that we wrote just up here. So we're going to say we want to, first of all, create an if statement, because we might as well check for an error while we do that at the same time. So I'm going to say if we do not get a proper prepared SQL statement, if it fails and can't be done, then create an error message. If it does succeed, then we're going to have an else statement that continues the script in here. So I'm going to say if we fail a MySQLi underscore statement underscore prepare with first of all the statement that we created up here. So we're going to say variable STMT and the SQL statement. There we go. Then go ahead and create an error message. And again, you can create any sort of error message. I'm just going to go and echo out something. You could also send the user back to the whatever page inside the website. I'm just going to go ahead and create an error message here that says there was an error. There we go. And then I'm just going to go ahead and exit my script here just to make sure we don't continue it. There we go. But if it does actually succeed, then we want to have an else statement. Now, a person asked me, why do I always check for errors before success inside these sort of things? Simply because if we check for success first, then we often forget to check for errors afterwards. So checking for errors first is also important, but we sometimes get hung up on the fact that we just want to finish the script, so we forget to do error messages. So that's why I do that. Afterwards here, we're going to go ahead and actually execute this SQL statement inside the database. So we're going to say we want to run a MySQLi underscore statements underscore bind underscore param, which means that we're simply going to tell it what the question mark is going to be replaced with before we execute the statements. And in this case, we want to replace it with the actual data that we got from the user, which is up here. We just grabbed it right before we started doing this. So what I want to do is, so first of all, want to say we have a statement, and we also have a parameter that is going to be a specific, or not a parameter, but we're going to have some data that is going to be a specific data type. In this case, I'm just going to set to S, which means it's going to be a string data type. And we're just going to have one, so we just need to have one S. And then I'm going to go and link to the post data that we grabbed up here. So now we have the data and we binded it with the statements. So all we need to do now is we need to execute it. So we're going to say MySQLi underscore statement, or STMT underscore execute. And we're just going to go and execute the statement. There we go. So now we executed it and we deleted any sort of entries from inside the database that might have included this specific user and a token. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go down to the next line down here. Now, people complain about me nesting all my statements within each other. So we could essentially continue the script inside this else statement. A lot of people thought that was unnecessary and clunky, so we're not going to do that anymore, apparently. So I'm just going to go and continue below here. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and actually, like I said, insert the token inside the database. So I'm going to create a new SQL variable, and I'm going to set it equal to a insert statement, so we can actually insert the data into the database. So we're going to say insert. Well, let's actually include double quotes first and a semicolon at the end here. Then I'm going to say insert into pwd reset. And then I'm going to include the data and values. There we go. Just going to include a semicolon at the end here. We could also do that up here. That would actually be the normal thing to do. So let's go ahead and do that. So in here, we're going to, first of all, write down the names of the different columns we have inside the database. Just going to fetch them from my cheat sheet here so I can just read them out. The first one is going to be password reset email. Now, again, we already included a auto increment to the first column inside the database, so we don't need to include that in here. It is done automatically, so we don't need to do that. The second one is going to be the password reset selector. So I'm just going to paste again and then change it to selector and make sure I spell that correctly, otherwise we're going to get errors. Then we're going to go to the next one and say password reset token, capitalized. And then the last one is going to be the password reset expires. There we go. Then the values are going to be what we have from inside, inside our script here. But for now, we're just going to go ahead and include placeholders because, like I said, we want to use prepared statements to make this secure. So we need to have 4 prepared statement placeholders. There we go. So 4 question marks. Now, we just need to do the exact same thing as up here. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy paste a lot of the things that we have up here. So I'm just going to say we have the if and the else statements that is going to come right afterwards. And we're going to still check for this error here if we can in fact run this inside the database, because if not, then it's going to give us an error. And inside the else statement, we're going to change a couple of different things before we execute it. First of all, we need to hash some of this information here, because we shouldn't insert any sort of sensitive data inside the database without protecting it first. In this case here, the token is very important, that if a hacker were to gain access to our database, that they can't just read the token out loud. So we need to do some kind of hashing method in order to hash it. Now you could use something that's not as powerful as what I'm about to use, but I'm just going to use this one because that's the one I always use when I hash something and insert it into the database. So we're going to use just the basic bcrypt method that always updates itself. So I'm just going to go ahead and say we have, before we run the statement down here, a variable called hashed token. Going to set it equal to password underscore hash parentheses. And then I want to include what I want to hash in here. So in this case, it's going to be the token that I'm going to grab from up here. And that's why we didn't convert it to hexadecimals yet, because we want to make sure we could insert it inside the database down here. And then afterwards, I'm going to tell it I just want to use the default, hashing method. So we're going to say password underscore default. So now that we hashed it, we can actually use this data to include inside the next statement down here. Now we do have 4 different question marks or placeholders inside our SQL statement. So we do need to have 4 different string s's inside our function down here. Then the first one we're going to include down here is going to be the user email again, because that's part of what we need to insert here. And then we want to include the selector, which we have up here. Just going to go ahead and grab that one. So we have a selector. Going to paste it in. Then we're going to insert the hashed token that we just created. And then the last one is going to be when should it expire. So we're going to grab the expiration date here. There we go. So now that we have this, we just simply run this. And now we have a new token inside the database. So that's what we need to do here. So what we did now is we finished all the actual database stuff. So it's a good idea to close off what we have here. So going below, I'm just simply going to go ahead and run a mysqli underscore stmt underscore close to close any sort of left out statements. And then I'm just going to go ahead and copy paste the statement in here because we want to make sure we close this specific statement. And then we're going to go ahead and close the connection because I don't want to have an open connection running. Even though it's proven that this new mysqli underscore close, it doesn't really matter if you close it or not, but it can do something about resources inside your website. So just to do it, we're just going to go ahead and make sure we close any sort of connection here. So we're going to say close, parentheses, semicolon. Okay, so now that we have this, all we need to do is send the email. So we're going to go down a couple of lines and we're going to get started on sending the actual email. So first we need to say who do we want to send the email to. So we're going to set it inside a variable. I'm going to send it to the user email because that's the one they gave us. Then we need to send the reset password to. So just going to use that one. Then I'm going to go below here and I'm going to create the subject. If I can spell that, subject. And I'm just going to go ahead and write something that is going to be the subject when they receive the email. So in this case here, just going to copy paste what I have here. I'm just going to write reset your password for mmtuts. I could say mmtuts.net if it had to be that obvious. Going to the next line here, we're going to create the message that is going to be sent to the user. I'm just going to go and write this out with you so we can understand what is going on here. I'm going to go ahead and say we have a message variable that's going to be equal to single quotes, semicolon. And then inside of here, we're going to include HTML as well, because we can do that if we set up the headers section of this email correctly. So I want to include a paragraph here, and I want to make sure that this paragraph says something about, let me actually go ahead and copy that text. And we're just going to go ahead and paste it in here. So we're just simply going to write something like, we received a password reset request. The link to reset your password is below. If you did not make this request, you can ignore this email. So something very basic along these lines here. Let me just make sure we close this off properly. There we go. Afterwards, we need to make sure we continue this message here. And I'm just going to go ahead and make this little continuation little trick that you can do when you create something using like this variables. I'm just going to go ahead and create a message variable again. And then I'm just going to go ahead and say we want to punctuation equal, which means that we're going to continue the previous variable we have up here. And I'm just going to go ahead and include another paragraph. In this case, I'm just going to copy paste again. it's going to say something along the lines of, here's your password reset link, colon. And then it's going to go to the next line and then give the user the link that they can click on in order to get sent back to our website and reset their password. Again, we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to use the same message variable continuation thing. And we're just going to go ahead and include a link this time, which is an anchor tag, and include the URL that we have from up here that we just created here. We're going to make sure we include that inside the hyperreference, and then we're going to include it inside, inside of here, in between the anchor tag tags. Now, some of you might be asking me, should we include the tokens inside the visible part of this link here? And for that, I don't think there's anything wrong with it, because the user, if this is the correct user, it will be the correct user looking at the correct link. So it doesn't really matter or not. And you can also just right click inside the browser and inspect it using the developer tool and see the link for it inside the anchor tag. So in the end, if you have a little bit of knowledge when it comes to websites, it doesn't really matter or not, because they can see it anyways. So having this link and closing off the paragraph here, do also notice I have a next line thing going on here. So we have the link on a separate line. We can actually go ahead and include the headers for the email. Now, the headers is a little bit of information that is going to be sent to tell the mail function how we want to send this and which information we need to send with the email. So in this case here, I'm going to say we have a headers variable. I'm going to set equal to double quotes. And the first header is going to be, who is this one from, this email? So it's going to be from our website. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy paste it in here. We're going to say from colon, then the name of who we are, so mmtuts in this example. We're going to include the email inside a couple of, I'm not sure what you call those, the pointy arrow thingies. I'm not sure what you call it in English. And then we're just simply going to go to new line by saying /r/n, which is something we use in order to go to a new line inside PHP. So now that we have this, we're just going to go ahead and copy the header, paste it below here, because we have more headers than just this one. And we need to do the same thing because we need to combine the next information into this variable here. In here, we just include who you want them to reply to. If they were to receive the email and then click on the reply button, who do you want them to reply to? So if they want to send an email back, then in this case, I want them to send it to my usemtuts@gmail.com. It could also be the one I used in my example at the beginning of this episode called danny@mmtuts.net, I believe. It really depends on you. And then we're going to go and copy it, and go down to the next line, because we're not done yet. We're going to include one more thing, which is going to be the thing that actually allow for HTML to become part of this email here. If you don't include this line that I'm about to include here, then HTML is not going to work inside the email you send them. So links and layouts and that sort of thing will not work. We could also style this if we wanted to, but I just didn't do that in this episode here. So we're going to set a content type. Content-type, colon, it's going to be text /HTML. And then again, we want to say backslash, if I can actually do that correctly on my keyboard here, backslash, there we go, r/n. Save it. So now that we have this, we just need to send it to the actual user. So going down a couple of lines, we're going to say we have a mail function, which is the one I was talking about. It needs to have a mail server running to actually do this, which is why at the end here, we're going to upload this to my online version of my website so we can actually test it out. Then I'm going to include the different information we have up here. So the first one is going to be, who do you want to send this email to? In this case, it's going to be our user. Then we want to include the subject for this email that the user is going to see when he receives the email. Then we're going to include the message. And then we're going to include the headers. There we go. So now that we have this, we can essentially just send the user back to, whatever page that just came from, in this case, the sign up page, with a success message. So we can create a header function. I'm just going to go ahead and set this one to location, colon. Then I'm going to go ahead and go back a directory because, as I said, I'm inside my includes folder. So I'm going to say .. And then I'm going to send them to my reset password, not the sign up page, the reset password page, because that's where they came from. Reset password.php. And then I'm going to send them a success message with it. So I'm just going to say question mark, reset equal to success. And there we go. That's all we need to do in this specific page here. So going back to our reset password page, we do need to have this success message visible when they return to the page. Again, I showed you how to do that in the login system episode, so I'm just going to copy paste and really explain briefly what it does here. So in here, after the form, which is where I want to display my error message or success message, I'm just going to go ahead and include some PHP code. What I want to include here is just simply a isSet statement that checks the URL for a reset get parameter. And then if that exists and it's equal to success, then I want to include a paragraph with a success message that says check your email account or something. Could say account. Doesn't really matter. It's up to you. So now that we have this, we basically have the first part of this system here. The next part is when the user receives this email and sends themselves back to our website, they need to land on some kind of page where they can actually reset their password. Now, when we go back inside our document here that we just created, the long one, you can see that inside our URL, we send them back to a page called create new password, which I said we're going to create later on, which is now. Now is later. So we're going to copy the name for this page, going to create a new file, save it inside our, let's say it's inside our regular root folder, not inside the includes folder, because this page we can actually see inside the website called create new password.php. Now inside this file, we're just going to go and copy paste what we have from inside the reset password file, because we need to have the same header, we need to have the same footer and that sort of thing. I can actually find the documents here. There we go. And now that we have this in here, I'm just going to go and delete some of the things we have inside my main containers here. I'm also going to go and delete the h1 tag here because I don't think it fits into what we're doing here. So now that we have this, we can actually go ahead and just include the form that allows for them to reset their password inside our website. Now, before we do that, we do need to check for these tokens. That's pretty important because we need to check if the tokens are inside the URL. And once they do actually reset their password, we again need to check the tokens with what we have inside the database, inside a separate script file. So right now, we just need to check for the tokens inside the URL. The way we're going to do that is, first of all, we're just going to grab the tokens. So inside of here, I'm just going to open up my PHP tags. There we go. And inside of here, I am going to, I notice I say that a lot, inside of here. There's certain catchphrases I keep using inside my episodes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a selector variable. I'm going to set it equal to $_get, brackets, semicolon, and then I want to grab the one called selector inside the URL. Because we have selector equal to something inside the URL. And again, I can prove that because if we were to go back to reset request, you can see it says selector equal to the selector we chose and validator equal to whatever we chose. So the next one is going to be validator we're going to check for. So I'm just going to copy paste what we have here and check for a validator. And again, we're also going to change this down here. So we're going to call this one validator. We're not going to call it token anymore. We're just going to call it validator because that's the token we use to validate the user inside the website. So now that we have this, we can actually go ahead and do the checks that we need to run to check if these tokens actually exist inside the URL. Again, this is just an extra safety precaution because we want to make sure that nobody tried to mess with the tokens inside the URL. That's why we're doing this here. So I'm going to run an if statement and I'm going to go ahead and check if these were empty because we first of all need to check if we do actually have these tokens inside the URL. So we're going to check for the selector or if the validator is empty. And we're just going to go ahead and change the name here. There we go. Let's actually make sure that's a variable. After doing this, I'm going to check for errors first. So I'm going to echo something like, we could not validate your requests if they did not have these tokens inside the URL. So I'm just going to copy paste what I have in my notes. Could not validate your request. And then afterwards, we're going to create an else statement. Inside the else statement, we need to check if these are in fact legit tokens. And we can do that by running a if statement. And then inside the condition of the if statement, we're going to run a new PHP function, which is basically going to check if these hexadecimal tokens we have inside the URL are in fact hexadecimal tokens. So they're the correct type of token that we want to see inside the URL. So the way we're going to do that is by using a function called C. I have to look at this because I don't usually use these functions that often, so I need to see how they're spelled. C type underscore X digit parentheses, and then we're going to check the selector to make sure this is in fact a proper hexadecimal format. Now, when we run this function here, it's going to give us a true or false statement, meaning that we need to check inside the if statement if it's not equal to false in order to check if this is valid or not. So we also need to say exclamation mark equal to false, or we could check if it was equal to true. Do it both ways. It's just a habit of programmers to do it this way here. And we also need to check the validator token to see if that one is also a valid type. So we're going to just copy paste what we have here. Should probably have copied the whole thing, so I'm just going to do that. Copy paste and check for the validator instead. There we go. So if this is in fact true and these are in fact valid hexadecimal formats, then we want to show the form that the user can use in order to reset their password. So inside of here, I said it again, inside of here we're going to close off the PHP tags just to make this easier for us. So we're going to close the PHP tag. There we go. And we're going to open it up again down here. Again, this is just a small trick if you want to make this easier for you when you want to write HTML forms. I've had people ask me about this too. Why don't you just close the PHP, create the HTML, and then open up the PHP again? We can do that. We could also just echo out the form. Again, that might not be that friendly for your text editor. So we're going to do it in the way that you guys prefer to do it, which is closing the PHP, opening it back up afterwards. So in here, we're going to create a form, and we're going to just go and delete the class here because I don't want to style it yet. And we're going to go ahead and set a action, and the action is going to point to the script that is going to actually check the token inside the database to make sure that this is the correct user who is trying to reset the password. And then if they are, then we want to update the password inside the database. So that's the file we want to refer to here. Now I'm going to refer to my includes folder because this is not an actual page inside the website. So this is a script file. And I want to call this one reset dash password .inc.php. The method is going to be post as well because it's the most secure one. And inside of here, we're going to include quite a bit of information. Some of it is going to be hidden, by the way. So we're going to go ahead and say we have an input that is going to be a hidden type of input, meaning that you can't see it inside the actual browser, but it is still there inside the code or inside the HTML markup. And we want to go ahead and set a name attribute to selector, because we're going to send the selector to this file here. Now this input is also going to have a value which is just going to be set equal to the selector we grabbed from the URL. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my PHP tags and close them again. And inside of here, I'm going to echo what we have up there. So we're going to echo out selector. Then I'm going to copy paste this entire thing, and I'm going to go ahead and paste it below. And I'm just going to go ahead and change the next one to validator. And then again, change the validator inside the echo here, like so. Then we're going to include another input, which is not going to be hidden. This time it's going to be a password type, because now the user is actually going to recreate their password and send it to the script that we have inside the next file. We're going to get started on in just a second. So we're going to say this is a password inside the name, and we're going to go ahead and set a placeholder instead of a value, because we want to tell the user what to write here. In this example, I want them to write or enter a new password ... and then I just want to copy paste it. And the reason I want to have two inputs for the password is because I want them to repeat the password in order to check if these two passwords were the same in the next script file. Because if they wrote something wrong and they only have one attempt, then again, they have to reset the password another time because they made a typo inside what they wrote here. So there's going to be password dash repeat for the name. And the placeholder is going to be something different. So repeat new password. Repeat new password. Then we're going to include a button. And the button is going to be a submit type. And now we need to change the name to something just along the lines of the last form we submitted. So something like reset dash password dash submit. So we know this is a submit name. Then we're going to write reset password inside the button, so they know what to click. And that is basically it for this section here. So now that we have this, we just need to create the last script file and then we're basically done. So going inside our editor, we're going to create a new file and we're going to call this one reset password.inc.php. So we're going to save it inside our includes folder, save it as reset dash password.inc.php. Inside this file, we're going to open up our PHP tags. You're just going to have to live with me saying inside here or inside that, because that's just what I keep saying and I can't stop it. Inside of here, I'm going to create an if statement, and I'm going to, first of all, do the exact same thing as before, and I'm going to check if the user got to this page in a valid way, meaning that they actually clicked the button they needed to click in order to get to this page here. So we're going to check for a isSet function that checks if we do have a specific post method available to us, which is going to be the one that we have inside the button name. So I'm going to say we have a $_post brackets, and inside of here we're going to check for a, what was it called, reset password submit. And then we're going to run a else statement. Let's just go and copy paste it from the previous one we did here. So we had the bottom, else we're going to send them back to the front page, because it's much easier just to copy paste when we created it already once before. So now that we have this, which I think is also a thing I say quite often, we can actually go ahead and create the actual thing that will update the password inside the database after we check if this is the correct user. So we're going to first of all grab all the data from inside the form that the user just submitted. So we're going to say we have a variable called selector. We're going to set it equal to a post method, so post, or what do you call it, $_post. And we're going to check for a selector. Just going to copy paste this because we're going to need quite a few of them. We're going to need 3 more. The next one is going to be a validator. And I'm just going to go and paste the name inside of here. And then the next one is going to be the password, pwd, inside the post method, and password inside the variable. And then we can say password repeat here. Then we're just going to say pwd-repeat. I think we called it inside the name attribute. So now that we have this, we can go ahead and check for a couple of different error handlers, because we need to make sure we do actually check for a few things before we continue our password reset process here. The first thing I want to check for is if the user did not include a password inside these password fields. So we're going to check if they're empty. So we're going to create an if statement. I'm going to check if they're empty. Again, we could just copy paste this from the previous section. So let's go back to the previous section. And I do believe we checked for empty somewhere, didn't we? Ah, here we go. Inside the create new password, which was the previous document we just edited stuff inside of, we have a section where we check for empty data. So we're just going to go ahead and copy paste that because it makes it easier. And then I'm just going to go ahead and replace password with selector and password repeat with validator. There we go. So now that we have this, we can go ahead and say, well, if these were empty, then we want to send them back to a certain page with an error message. So in this case here, I want to send them back using a header. Just going to copy paste from my notes because this is not very long. Going to send them back using a header to the sign up page that says new password empty. or we could send them back to the page that just came from, where they try to reset their password. Let's send them back to that page. So create dash new dash password dot PHP. With this, we can go ahead and continue here. So we're just going to say we have an else if statement because we want to check for something else. Then we're going to check if the passwords do not match each other inside of here. So if password is not equal to password repeat, then we also want to send them back with a different error message. So we're just going to copy paste. And this one we're not going to check if they were empty or tell them it was empty. We're going to say password not same or something. Just include whatever you want inside the error handler here. After this, we can actually get started on actually checking for the tokens. So what we want to do now is we want to get the current date, because then we can match it with the date we inserted inside the database to check if the token has been expired or not. So I'm going to create a current date variable. I'm going to set equal to a date object inside PHP. And I'm going to check for the same format as before, which is a capitalized U, which is going to give us a standard date type. Then we're going to include the database connection because we are about to check the database for this date here. So we need to require or include, doesn't matter what you choose, the dbh.inc.php file. Then we're just going to close off this specific section here. So the next thing we want to do is we want to select the actual token from inside the database. So I'm going to run a SQL statement inside the database, selecting the token from inside our new table. And we're going to do that using the selector token, not the validator. The selector token we're going to use in order to actually run a select statement inside the database, because I said we had to separate these two functions. And the validator token is going to validate the proper user. Two separate things that we're going to keep separate just for safety. So what I'm going to do underneath where we did actually require the database is I'm going to go ahead and include a select or SQL statement, not a select statement. Well, it's also going to be select statement. So I'm going to set the SQL variable equal to double quotes, semicolon, and then I'm going to run a select statement. Select all from pwd reset, which is the table that we have the token inside of, where pwd reset selector is equal to question mark, because we need to have placeholders, and pwd reset expires is greater than or equal to current date, which is a variable we have up there. Now I can actually see in my notes here, I did just paste in current date, which is the one we have up here. I just want to mention this because this might be something you guys ask about. When we run prepared statements inside, let's say a select statement like the one I have down here, the places you want to add placeholders is for data that was sent by the user. So because I created this variable myself, not the user, but me inside the script here, we don't technically need to run it as a placeholder. But just to keep everything simple, let's go and ignore my notes for now and just keep using placeholders, because that might confuse you less. So inside of here, after doing this, we just simply need to run this statement here. And we can, if we want to, just go back to our previous, script, and just copy paste. Because afterwards we need to create a statement. We need to run a if-else statement as well. And I can just go ahead and copy paste it in here. So below here, we create a new statement. We simply check, can we run this statement with this SQL string up here? If not, then we get an error and we close off the script. Else, we want to go ahead and do something here. Now, we're going to change it slightly because we don't want to check for the user email, which is just copy pasted, but we want to check for the selector that we got sent from the previous form. So now we're checking the database, picking the, the correct token using the selector, and then we execute it, meaning that we execute this select statement up here. Then what I want to do is I want to actually grab the result. So we're going to create a variable called result, set it equal to MySQLi underscore statements underscore get underscore results parentheses, and then we want to make sure we include the statement inside of here because it's from that statement we want to get the results from. And what we want to do now is we want to go ahead and fetch every single row that we have inside the result here, which should only be one row because, like I said, we should always only have one token inside the database per user. So here we want to run if statement, going to say, well, if we cannot fetch any rows by saying exclamation mark $row equal to MySQLi underscore fetch underscore as suck, meaning that we're going to grab the data from the database and insert it inside a associative array, which means that we can simply refer to the data by the column names inside our array here. So we need to make sure we include the result inside the function here. So now, if we cannot get any rows, it's going to give us an error because there were no rows to grab from inside the database. But if not, then we want to continue the script. So in this case here, if we could not grab any sort of rows, I just want to throw a error message that I just copy pasted from my notes that simply says something like you need to resubmit your reset request, and then exit out of the script here. Afterwards here, we want to make sure we run a else statement, because if we could get rows from the database, then we need to make sure that we do something with that data. So now that we have the data from inside the database, we now need to match the token that we have inside the database with the token we sent from the form. And we need to make sure that both of these tokens are in binary data. The one from inside our form is not binary, it's hexadecimal format. So we need to convert that back to binary. So inside the else statement here, the first thing we're going to do is we're first of all going to go ahead and convert our validator token into a binary. So we're going to say we have a variable called token bin for binary. I'm going to set it equal to a function called hex2bin. And then I'm going to include our validator token inside of here. So I'm just going to copy paste it from up here and paste it in. So now we can actually match this one with the token from inside the database, and that's what we're going to do next here. So I'm going to create a new variable. I'm going to call this one token check, which should give us a true or false statement afterwards, which is a Boolean. So I'm going to set this equal to a function called password underscore verify. And then I'm going to check for, first of all, the token bin that we have here. And I want to check for the $row brackets, which means that we're going to grab one of the pieces of data we got from the database, and I'm just going to refer to the column name here, which is going to be password reset token. So pwd reset token. So now that we have this, we should get a true or false statement, and we can go ahead and check for these inside an if statement. So I'm going to check if our token check is equal to true or false, because we should probably check for errors first. If it's equal to false, then we want to do something. We want to just go ahead and echo out a error message. So we're going to say, you need to resubmit your reset request, blah, 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 just like we did before. And then we want to run a else if statement. Now, a lot of people ask me, why do I run a else if statement here? Because you could also just run a else statement, but because we're checking if token check is equal to false, the other one has to be true, right? So if it's equal to true, then it needs to run the else statement. But what if the data is equal to, let's say, I don't know, Daniel, my name, because some kind of error happens inside the code? It should not be possible, but if it does happen, then it will run the else statement even though it is not equal to true. So we need to make sure we do a else if statement here, just to make sure that we only check if token check is equal to true. At least that's my logic behind here. So we're going to check for a true statement. And then we want to actually start updating the password and that sort of thing inside the database, because right now everything is like it's supposed to be. We use the token to check if the user was the correct user, and now we need to do the changes he wants us to do. So afterwards here, inside the else if statement, I am going to go ahead and first of all grab the email of the user, because we need to pinpoint which user inside the database we want to change the password of, because we do also have a user table inside the database with the current password that he can't remember. So that's the table that we need to make changes to now. So I'm going to say we have a token email, set it equal to $row, brackets, and then I want to set it equal, or set the name for this specific column to password reset email, which is the name of the column we have inside the database of the table called reset password. I think we called it that, right? No, we called it password reset. That's what we called it. So password reset email, because we want to pinpoint the same user inside the user table that tried to reset using this token here. So we're going to use the token specifically for this purpose here. So after doing this, we just need to run an SQL statement. And we want to actually select the user from inside the database. So we want to select all from user table, or users table in my case here, where the email users is equal to a placeholder. Then what we can do afterwards here is we can just simply go ahead and run the prepared statement, because we used a placeholder. So we're just going to copy paste what we have up here. Again, there's no need to do double work if we just have the same code somewhere else. So I'm just going to copy paste. There we go. Make sure I close off the curly bracket here as well, because we don't want to receive error messages. Anytime we get a unexpected something error inside the browser, it's because you made a typo. You need to check for any sort of errors you made by not including a semicolon or a bracket or something, because that's the most frequent question I get from people on my login system tutorial, which is when they get unexpected something as an error message. It's because you made a typo somewhere, so you need to make sure you double check it to make sure it's correct. Okay, so after we checked if we could in fact run this SQL statement inside the database using the statement we wrote here, we're going to go ahead and grab the user from inside the users table. So inside the else statement down here, the first thing we need to do is we need to make sure we bind the parameters so we can actually replace these placeholders inside the SQL statement. So we're going to run the mysqli underscore stmt underscore bind underscore param parentheses, semicolon, and then we just need to fill in the information here. So we need to grab the statements. We need to tell it how many placeholders do we have. We have one that needs to be inside a string. And then afterwards, we need to tell it what we want to replace the placeholder with, where in this case, it's the token email, like so. Afterwards, we need to actually run the statement. So mysqli underscore stmt underscore execute. Then we want to make sure we execute the statement in here. And now that we did this, we can just go ahead and grab the result again, just like we did up here. So let's just go ahead and scroll up here, run a result variable. We're basically just going to copy a lot of this. So we're going to copy down to the else statement here. Then I'm going to go down, paste it in, make sure we close off the else statement properly, like so. Now we should probably change the error message to something else, because it should probably not say this. Let's just say something like there was an error, exclamation mark. Now, what we need to do now is we just simply need to update the user's information inside the user table. So inside the else statements, I'm going to run another SQL statement, and this SQL statement is going to update the password from inside the users table. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a SQL statement, set it equal to a update statement, I believe, update users set pwd users equal to a placeholder where email users is equal to question mark. Now again, this is how my columns look like inside my users table. Yours might look different if you didn't follow my tutorial on how to make a login system. But I'm simply just going in here saying that I want to update the user's password where the user's email matches the email from inside what we just had up here. So we have the user's email, and we just need to fetch the correct user from in here and update it. Below here, I am going to go ahead and do the exact same thing. I'm going to run a statement, just like we did above here, and fill in the parameters. So we're just going to go and copy paste again. Let's go ahead and say we want to create a statement. You probably don't need to create a statement every time, but I just do it to make sure. And then we're just going to go ahead and paste it down to here, where we do actually execute the statements. There we go. Make sure you close off the else statement. That's important, because we do have an else statement here. I didn't copy the closing bracket up. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fill in the information inside the parameters here. So right now we have 2 parameters. So we need to include another S. And the first one is going to be the password that needs to get updated inside the database. So in order to do this, we do need to hash the new password, because the user submitted a password up here that he repeated a couple of times. And we need to make sure we hash that new password before we insert it inside the database. Otherwise, people can just do like I mentioned in the first way you could create a password reset system. They would just send a new password to you. We don't want that to be a thing. So we're going to go ahead and make sure we hash it here. So I'm going to say we have a variable called new pwd hash. I'm going to set equal to a function called password underscore hash parentheses semicolon. And then I want to, first of all, include the password, which is going to be what I just copied, which is the password the user sent us. And then I want to use a password underscore default method. Default, that's spelled incorrectly. Make sure you spell that correctly. Default. So now we did this, we can actually go ahead and include this information inside the statement down here. So the new password we just created, which was hashed, is going to be the first parameter, which is up here where we actually update something inside the database. And then we need to tell it which user we want to update it with. In this case here, we had the token email that we created up here. So I'm going to use that one. And that's basically all we need to do here. So now we just updated the password inside the database where the user wanted to update their password. So now the system is actually working. But like I said, we need to do one last thing, which is to make sure we delete the token that we created when the users wanted to do this. So, like I said, we don't want to always have a lot of tokens inside the database for the same user. So in the next part here, we're going to just simply run a basic delete statement. I'm just going to go and copy paste it again, because basically we're doing the same thing as we've done so many times before. Just going to go ahead and slide it out and explain what exactly is going on here. Let's go ahead and, why does that slide so weird? Okay, so I just copy pasted this section here, and I'm going to explain it very briefly since it's very basic. We did it a lot of times before. I just simply ran a new SQL statement, which was a delete statement that was going to delete from password reset, where the password reset email is equal to a placeholder. Then I just went ahead and checked if we could actually run this statement inside the database. If we can, I just went ahead and said that we wanted to delete any sort of tokens that belong to a user with the same email as the email we referred to up here. So the user's email. And then I just simply executed it. So now that we did this, we can actually send the user back to whatever sign up page or whatever page they came from where they tried to update their password, and give them a success message. Basically, it's working now. So let's go ahead and check if there was anything else we actually needed to do here. Now, in my example here, I decided to send them back to the sign up page, and I do want to include a success message for the user when they get there. So when we get back to the sign up page, it's going to give us this information inside the URL. And that's what we need to check for inside the sign up page here. So right above where we included the link that we started out with, the very first thing we started doing in this episode, we're going to include a success message if they did actually manage to do this. So I'm going to just go ahead and copy paste it here, because it's something, again, we've done plenty of times before. Then I'm going to explain it. We're just simply checking if there is a get parameter inside the URL we can grab called new password or new pwd. That's the one we just referred to inside the last file. And I'm going to check if new pwd is equal to password updated. If it is, then we're just going to give a success message. That's all we're doing here. If you take this we just created and upload it to your online server, let me just go and do that really quickly. Again, I'm just sitting here transferring all my files to the online version. Make sure you change the database file once you do actually upload it to a website, because once you upload it to an online server, you're not going to have this information in here to your server or to your database. So make sure you change that accordingly when you go to your hosting company and check what the information is. So I just uploaded to my online version inside the browser. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to a new link. Instead of mntools.net/forgotten password, I'm going to go to mntools.net/forgotten password version 2, v2. And as you can see, we have the same website, but the version we just created together. So I'm going to go ahead and go inside my sign up page. And I'm going to say, well, ooh, Jesus, I forgot my password. Again, I didn't style anything, so it's not going to look pretty. I'm going to click it. And then I'm going to type in my email address, which is going to be danny@mntools.net. Then I'm going to receive a new password and we get a error message. Let's go ahead and check out what we just did wrong here. Oh yeah, I did forget to include something here. Inside our reset-request.inc.php file, you need to make sure you include the connection inside mysqli_close. So this one was not actually necessary to include, which is funny why this one should give us the error message. So after doing this, let's go ahead and double check it again. I did actually receive an email. Just want to let you guys know, but I'm just going to go and delete it because we're starting over because it didn't work. So going back inside our sign up page, I'm going to go ahead and click forgot your password. I'm going to type in my email, I'm going to send it. And then it's going to tell us that we need to check our email. So now we get a success message here. I'm going to go inside my mailbox. I'm going to check it. Oh, we got a link. I'm going to go ahead and copy it. I'm going to paste it inside the browser somewhere. And then I can actually reset my password here. So I can go ahead and say I want to enter a new password, which in this case is going to be, I don't know, let's write something like Daniel. And Daniel. Reset password, and your password has been reset. And we're still logged in, because I didn't log out from the previous session. Now go ahead and ignore that I was logged in, because that was from the beginning of this episode when I logged in to show you that I did actually change my password. So now that I logged out, I'm going to log back in using the new data I just typed in for my password. It doesn't matter, just ignore that I was logged in. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and log in. I'm going to say we have test, I believe it was called, and password was Daniel. Going to log in, and as you can see it says you are logged in, because we did actually update our database here. So this is how you create a forgotten password system using tokens. If you guys are interested in learning how to create a forgotten password system not using tokens, maybe because it's slightly complicated for you, go ahead and let me know in the comments section below, because if a lot of people do want me to create a different version of this specific system, I will do it. Maybe not immediately, but at some point. It sort of stressed me out that I was promising this specific episode after my voice was sick after my flu. So I couldn't record this long episode, and that's why there hasn't been so many videos for the past few weeks. Because when I get the flu for a week, then I lose my voice for another week afterwards. So I'm still not entirely ready yet with my voice. As you can hear, my voice is probably start to fall together. But this is how you create a forgotten password system. Go ahead and download the lesson files in the description inside my Patreon. If you support me, you can get it in there. If you get some kind of error that you need my files to help you with, like I said, download them inside the description of this video from my Patreon if you are supporting me on Patreon. So that's a place where you can get the lesson files for this episode. And that's basically it. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you in the next one.